Do you come from a land down under? Oh, hello there. Feeling a little under the weather? Well, how about a spot of the old fantasy esports thingamabob? But where to play? Well, between you and me, sir, I do happen to know a little establishment. Very selective, very hush-hush. But, just saying, I could pull a few strings, put in a good word for you, maybe get you some sort of membership. Alpha Draft, it's called. The thinking gentleman's choice. Now, after Renegades lost in the group stage of the IEM Taipei, which was the Asia Minor for CSGO, and then made it to the grand final, played the same team, the Mongols from Mongolia, lost this match as well, and had lost 3 maps over the tournament to them. It reminded me of Sponge's comments at, I think it was the iBuy Powerland, right? The one where they got 16-0'd by Luminosity, where he did an interview on stage and he was upset. He felt like he said that the casters had implied like they weren't a threat, and he'd read a Gosu game, as he actually said interview, but he obviously meant article, a prediction article, suggesting like the team would have no chance and they wouldn't do well. And he was really upset at this. He felt like his team didn't get enough credit and people were downplaying them as a shit team. Now, obviously at that tournament they did very poorly. They did all right at the next tournament, the RGN. But since then, they've certainly had their issues, and obviously this, in many ways, is one of the lowest points. When the best team in the tournament was supposed to be Renegades or Tyloo. Tyloo gets banned before the tournament starts. Now it's supposed to be the way open for Renegades to win the tournament. They don't win it, and in fact they lose all the maps to the Mongols, a team from Mongolia. So, when we talk about this, we have to be realistic. So Sponge was upset at the criticism, felt like they were treated like they were trash, like they were a threat. Now, I like some of the Renegades guys, but come the fuck on. First of all, they benefited from community hype. The same people trash talking them now, they benefited from that hype after their Gfinity Spring Masters 1 result, where people were using them as a vehicle to joke and make fun of NA. Like, oh, look, even this team from Australia is way better than you guys. This team's close to the European level. You know what? If these guys moved to another country and had salaries and stuff, hey, they'd be taking advantage in the way that you guys, Mene, haven't. Well, you've had the salaries, you've now been to a lot of events, you've now moved to NA, you haven't done that so far though, have you? So it has to come back on you eventually. There has to be a kind of adding up of the tally, and we have to look in the margins and figure out where it actually all ends out. Not least because, remember, there was another factor at play where we knew that Vox at the time was supposed to be the best Australian team. Well, the second best Australian team, Immunity, had gone to face it, and they'd eliminated Team Liquid in last place. So as a result, this hype around the Australian scene was there, but it was always a what if. What if they got this situation, which now Renegades have had. So if we summarise the history of Renegades, they were originally Vox Eminor, and this team with a core of Sponge, Azza, and Havoc go back to 2013. They played at MSI Beat It. They came 4th place there. It was back when they had Sniper, who's now in Immunity. They got wrecked by Fnatic. They played against Delpan, Twist and Peters SK. Close enough in one of the maps, but they weren't at the level of the European teams. 2014 comes along. They go to ESL1 Katowice. Close game versus LDLC, which at the time was an alright team. It wasn't the very, very good team that later came on in Cologne that year. They had a huge loss to 3D Max on the exact same map, Inferno. 3D Max with the Finnish guys, Alu, etc., Natu rather. Then came Yam. He comes in for Top Gun, and they go to ESL1 Cologne in 2014. They finish last place there, another major. This time, they have an okay loss to Dignitas on Dust 2. They're very good Dignitas, obviously. But they got ultra wrecked by Titan on Nuke 16-1. Now we come to the next... Well, they didn't have DreamHack Winter, but... Then we come to ESL1 Katowice, 2015, last year. They go to this major. This time they don't finish last place. They finish 9th to 12th, but they do go out in the group stage still. So, let's look at the highs of this team over their career. So they had the Katowice qualifier in 2015, where they managed to qualify, despite the fact they were in a qualifier that had many teams that didn't make it. Team Liquid didn't make it. You had the likes of Dignitas, as in the one with Pimp and Fetish, didn't make it. You had a number of good teams. They managed to make it out that. That was a high point for them. Then came Gfinity Spring Masters 2. Sorry, it was 2 I meant before, not 1. Spring Masters 2 was the one where they went 1 to 2 to 1 in terms of best of 2s played. So they tied Fnatic, fantastic stuff, won a map off Fnatic. Tied NIP, fantastic, won a map off NIP. Beat Team Liquid 2-0, but lost 2-0 to Na'Vi and didn't get out of the group in the end. Then at ESWC, they managed to have a win over CLG there, so they're keeping up in terms of the NA teams. Still solid, still a gap between them and the European teams. Don't build on the Gfinity results. IEM Gamescom comes along, which was using that format where you have 3 lives. They played SK 3 times, beat them twice. This was SK that has Cadian, etc., the Danish guys. Lost to them once as well. That's it. They go to the major, ESL 1 Cologne, and they managed to beat Titan there, but that's it. They go out in the group stage. And then they have the Crown Invitational was in October. And at that, they lost in the group stage in a best of 3, twice 16-14 to Immunity, their rivals from Australia. But they got into the playoffs. In the semi-finals, they played Virtus Pro. They actually smashed Virtus Pro on one of the maps, but they lost the third map, 14-16 on Cash, and they didn't get into the final there. Last and final positive for them, iBuy Power at RGN, they managed to beat CLG both times. So, now we've got to look at the lows. Those are the best things they accomplished. Not aside from the Gfinity run, nothing particularly fantastic. Just beating teams that are outside of the top 10, like NA teams, other teams around the level, or lower level European teams. Then you come to the lows that the team had. So in September, they lost to Easy Skins 11-16 on Dust 2 at DreamHack London. And Easy Skins were not a good team, have never been a good team since, and that was an embarrassing loss. Then, same month, they didn't qualify for DreamHack Cluj. They lost to Team Liquid, they beat Winter Fox, who weren't good, and they lost to Team Liquid again, the upgraded Team Liquid that had Hecon at this point in time. Okay, November comes around. They get eliminated in the group stage at the iBuy Powerland. This is where they got 16-0'd by the Luminosity guys. Then, you come to early this year. They're at the IEM Taipei event. They lose 13-16 to the Mongols on Cash in the group stage. Now, the score was deceptive here because they were down 1-9 when they were on CT side. They were down in the game 5-15. So the Mongols had 10 map points potentially, and the Mongols managed to win 16-13. So they did do a comeback, but the Mongols also potentially could have ended this match 16-5, 16-8, something more like that, and it being a stomp, like all the other maps were essentially. Now, when they get to the final, they get beaten 2-0 in the final by the Mongols. They lose 9-16 on Cobble, and they lose 2-16 on Inferno. Now, what's interesting is, Inferno was the same map that Chiefs, currently the second best team in Australia, but second or third around that time, actually managed to beat the Mongols on Inferno 16-13. The same Mongols had lost to Tai Lu, had lost to Wings at the Fulcrum Gaming event earlier in the same month. Now, in that series, the Mongols series in the final, Havoc and Sponge combined for a -38 over the series, and Yam, if you add him into the mix, that threesome went -56 for the series. So terrible fragging and differential, giving up loads of deaths, barely any frags. JKS did his job. He went ham. He got 40 kills over the series. Couldn't help them win the series. They weren't close to winning a map in the final. Now, what's funny is some people had actually, when they'd lost the group stage game on Cash, been suggesting they were trying to throw the game there so as not to play Chiefs in the semi-final. They wanted to come second so the two Australian teams could meet in the final and both potentially go to the qualifier. Obviously, that was not the case. If you saw the way the final played out, that seems like quite an unrealistic scenario to suggest. Now, one of the problems is some of these losses are really embarrassing. Mongols losses, we don't even know. Losing to Easy Skins. Don't make it to Cluj because they can't even compete with Team Liquid at that tournament. And the highs are not that high. Really, it's a couple of upset big wins at Gfinity. But then beyond that, when they join Renegades and they get figured out, then there's not very many good places. It's beating NA teams, not even the best NA teams, and then beating lesser European teams. Now, what you got to look at is, over the year, and all these results I'm counting, by the way, are only when they have this 5-man lineup before they kicked Havoc out. The number of times they got wrecked covered the whole year. So I have 15 occasions on which they lost a map getting 6 or less rounds themselves. 15 times with this lineup. Of those, by the way, 3 of them were Gfinity, 2 of them were ESWC, 3 of them were Gamescom, 1 was ESL Cologne, 1 was DreamHack Stockholm, 2 were DreamHack Stockholm, One was Crown, one was iBuyPower, one was RGN, one was IEM Type 8. In fact, it feels like almost every tournament, they got bodied massively on one map at least. 15 times, 6 rounds or less. 5 times, they had 3 rounds or less. And 4 of the 15 times, they lost their own map pick. So they lost Train ASWC to Na'Vi. They got 0 T rounds there. They lost Cobble to Team Liquid, which is their pick at DreamHack Stockholm. Got 40 rounds there. Remember, T-side map. They lost Train to Virtus Pro at Crown. They got 3 T rounds there. Again, a T-sided map. And against the Mongols on Inferno at Taipei, they got 2 T rounds on Inferno and got wrecked there on their map pick. So if you look at all the times they were wrecked, and you do an average on how many T rounds they're getting, they're only getting 2 rounds average in the games they're getting wrecked on T side. Now, 14 out of the 15 times that they got wrecked, they failed to get over 4 T-side rounds. So we're already seeing what the problem is here. T-sides aren't good enough in the games they're getting bodied in, and in general, not good enough T-sides is what's not allowing them to do well in these tournaments, because if you're getting wrecked on a map or 2 in every single tournament, it's no wonder you're not going far. It's no wonder you're not winning series. It's no wonder you're not getting into the playoffs often. Now, of the times they got wrecked, 4 times were on Cobble. 3 times were on Dust 2. 3 times were on Inferno. Now, the Dust 2 ones, I can give them a break, because the 3 times they got wrecked on Dust 2 was against NIP, Mouse, and TSM. They're some of the best teams on Dust 2, so I can give them a break there. Likewise, when they got bodied twice on Train, that was Na'Vi and VP. 6 teams on Train, some of the best in the world. When they lost on Cash, it was to Envy, the best team in the world on Cash at the time. But now let's go and look at the wins. So they had 17 wins that I called notable. So as in versus Fnatic, Team Liquid, NIP, CLG, SK, Titan, Team Liquid, Virtus Pro, CLG, C9, Luminosity, the old Luminosity, and Team Liquid. So either NA teams or European teams. They had 17 wins that I considered notable, not versus like lesser teams that they'd be expected to beat. Of those 17 wins though, remember how many times they got bodied? 15 times, 6 rounds or less. In the 17 notable wins, 5 times the opponent had less than 10 rounds. So think about that. In 12 of the 17 notable wins, the opponent gets double-digit rounds. So what's happening is that when they lose badly, they're getting ultra-wrecked. When they win, they're winning narrowly. And in their wins, the notable wins, they had an average of 8 T rounds. So we can already see the wins, the big differences on T side. They're winning T half on the big wins, and that's what's getting them these wins. So obviously their CT side isn't good enough. Because the T-side's also not mega, by the way, but when it is good enough, they can win the map, and when the T-side isn't good enough, the CT side can't carry them at all. Of the big wins, here's what's interesting. Cash was the one they had 7 big wins on. Problem is, 4 of them were before Gamescom, which was around... Let me think. I'll check when Gamescom was, actually. Gamescom was in August. So 4 of the Cash wins came up to Gamescom. So they were earlier than that. So basically the first half of their time as Renegades, pretty much. After that, they've only got 3 wins and people are avoiding Cash. Then Dust 2. Now what's interesting, in Dust 2's only, they've won 4 of the Dust 2's in this scenario, big wins, and 3 of them are iBuyPower onwards, so mainly against NA teams, so we can't count that as too much of a strength because it's only been NA teams really. 3 wins on Train, 2 on Cobble, 2 on Mirage, 2 on Inferno, nothing on Overpass. Never won a notable game on Overpass. Obviously, map they don't play very often. So as a result, when we add all this up, the wins and being wrecked, now we arrive at what their map pool is like. So statistically, their best map on LAN was Mirage. They had with this lineup, they had a 4-1 record, 80% win rate. Problem is, that's only an 80% win rate because they protected it by not wanting to play it. It was their second most banned map and one of the least banned by opponents. So even though they have a good win rate on it, they're not picking it, they're banning it themselves, and it's not as though opponents are banning it. So they don't like it themselves. And in fact, Sponge has even said somewhere in the past that he didn't really understand the T side of Mirage. He didn't like it that much. Also, only 3 of their 17 big wins came on Mirage. So it's not as though it is as strong as it looks on paper. Their real best map is Cash. Like I said though, a lot of the big wins came earlier on. But this is a map where they've never banned, pretty much, ever, this map. It's the 3rd most banned against them, so other teams are identifying it as a map they don't want to play unless they're really good on Cash. Like I said, they did lose to Envy on it. Obviously, Envy wants to play you on Cash. They were 9-5 on this, 64% win rate. This is their true best map. When you look at quantity of times played, number of big wins on it, and the fact that they don't ban it. Those 3 qualities make this their best map. 7 of their big wins on it come, but like I say, of the 7, over half are from earlier in the year. In the latter, let's say, 5 months, this hasn't been a map that they've been able to get on and get many good wins on. So their best map already's got some shakiness around it because it's been figured out that people don't play them on it. Then you come to their second best map, Inferno. They are 6-4 on it, 60% win rate. Now, before they got Yam, they used to get wrecked on this map. But they got this map, they had a bunch of wins on it, but of the 6 wins, only 2 of their big wins come on this map. And even worse, 5 times they got wrecked came on this particular map, which actually I realise now doesn't make sense, because how could you have 5 wrecks if you only have 4 losses? Which must mean that when I put the 5 wrecks, I must have originally been counting in the lineup that was at Katowice that didn't have Yam in it. So I'll change that to 4, presumably. Yeah, because they got bodied on that one. Okay, so 4 of the... So 2 of their big wins come on Inferno, their second best map. 4 of their massive losses come on it. So you can see there, even their second best map, quite shaky. It's not like they can just go to these 2 maps and be a great team. Third best map, Train. 4 wins out of 7 times they played it. Then you get to Cobble. They have 6 wins but 7 losses, 46% win rate. They get wrecked on Cobble a lot. They cannot go near Cobble. Dust 2 is tied for the second most bans for them on their part. This is the map they're banning out all the time. And it's a map where obviously they've lost a lot of the time. And then finally, Overpass. They have only played twice with this lineup on LAN and they've never won it. And it is the map that they ban the most. So, when we consider this team's map pool, because we're going team down identity-wise, style, and then we're going to go to players. We've gone results, identity, the strong team on 1 map only. Cash, and most teams figured that out and banned it, and that's why they became way less effective from the middle of the year onwards. Then, questionable. Mirage, they're questionable on, but they themselves refuse to play it, so we can't see if they actually would be worse on that if they could figure it out. Inferno and Train are realistically the ones that they're okay on, and depending on the team, they could get a win on. They could win a game on Inferno, could get wrecked on it as well. Could win some on Train. They're not getting wrecked on Train, but they're not doing super well on it either. They're bad on Cobble, wrecked on it tons of times. They're bad on Dust 2, hence why they're having to ban it all the time. And Overpass is basically their permaban and they don't play it. So of the 7 maps in the pool, they've got 1 good map, 1 they don't even play that could be questionable. So really 2 questionable. So they've really got 3 maps they can even play. They don't play Mirage themselves. If it comes to Mirage, Cobble or Dust 2, they're not good on. So over half the map pool is nothing good for them. So you can see in terms of maps, they're already in trouble. So as a result, you scout this team out already, and you're seeing that, okay, maps, this is a 1-map team. Unless they get cash, they're not even going to win 1 map for certain. And so as a result, if they get cash, they could win cash. But if you play a series, you're going to need to win 2 out of 3 maps. So as a result, it's no surprise they're not winning series, because it's going to be very hard to win series when you only have 1 map that you're really strong on. The rest are very questionable and depending on the opponent. So as a result, they're at best going to be a 50-50 on the second map, assuming they win cash in the first place. Often worse than a 50-50. They're a T-sided team. It heavily dictates if they have a chance to win. They have to essentially win the T half, because that's how they win games. When they get wrecked is when they don't get many T-side rounds. CT side is not strong. It's not even particularly stable. Hence why even when they get the 8 T rounds and they win the T half, in all those games they're winning the notables, remember that in most of the notable wins they had, the opponent's still getting double digits. So that means even when they get the 8 rounds on T side or more, they're still giving up rounds on their CT side to make the game close. So they're not that strong on T side, definitely not strong on CT side. Now, in terms of bans, here's another problem. Extremely predictable. When they went to Gfinity Summer Spring Masters 2, no one knew who they were. No one prepared for them. No one knew what to do against them. But now, they're one of the most predictable teams in the world to ban against. In 26 opportunities with this lineup, they banned out Overpass 20 of the 26 times that they could. So Overpass, you know they're going to ban. So as a result, if you're that team who doesn't like Overpass, don't worry. They're going to ban it for you. You're always getting an advantage there. 12 times out of 26, they banned Mirage, and 12 times they banned Dust 2. So Overpass, they don't play. Mirage, they have a good record on, but don't play. And Dust 2, they've got wrecked on a bunch, so they don't play that either. So they're the 3 maps you know going into a series. They're very likely to ban 1, 2, or 3 of these 3, depending on the format. The other 3 were banned. Let me see. The other BAPs were banned something like 12 out of 57 times. So it's pretty obvious. Now, the ban patterns now is that they used to ban Dust 2 a lot until they were coming into the NA lands. Now, they've changed it up a bit. They're starting to play Dust 2 a lot. Mirage has been banned throughout their whole history. And against them, how teams have figured them out. Overall, teams have figured this out. You ban Train, Inferno, Cash. So they're their 3 best maps, since they're going to take Mirage out themselves. So as a result, if you only have 1 or 2 bans, you take out Cash, and then you take out Train. If you have the full 3 bans, like you do in certain tournaments, obviously you can take all 3. Now, teams usually pick which of the 3 to ban just based on their own strength. Hence, Train often comes out first. That's often the most banned against them. That's been banned against them 12 times. Inferno, 10 times. Cash, 9 times. So as a result, teams know what to do. Now, interestingly enough, the Cash bans have really cooled off since RGN tournament onwards. Now teams aren't even banning Cash against them. They don't even respect them on that. And Cash was the map that Mongols wrecked them on. That was supposed to be their strong map. Or when they were on the CT side. So, you come in now and you look at the team itself. Because we've seen they're getting wrecked, even on strong maps. They don't have a strong map pool. And in terms of bans, very predictable. And the bans against them can even be varied. Teams don't have to ban the same map each time. Now you come into the fact that the team itself. So, first of all, the best players in the team, JKS, Azza, Yam, all from Queensland in Australia. That's the 3-man core of the skill. Sponge, Azza and Havoc were the early Wox core, so they've been together a long time. And of the players, we'll start at the top. JKS. Easily the best player on this team. By far the best Australian player that I've seen. He obviously had the fantastic performance when he was at Gfinity. Has never been quite at that level again. Was actually good at IMT Taipei. He did his part. He was also pretty solid at RGN where they got a deep finish. Overperformed massively at Gfinity, but admittedly people didn't know his style. People knew nothing of what to expect on him. And they got rolling. They played a very loose style and he was able to go ham. He's had a few games where he's had bad games, but all in all, he's going to get his numbers. He's going to do well. He's the best player in this team by far to me, the star player. Second best player, again, by a clear margin, is Azza. This is a guy where he's only had a few bad games in his career. He had some average games. Like there was a period in time for the first part of the year after Gfinity where he was just doing okay, but he really picked it up and towards the last few months of the year started to get on form again and start to be good. Now the key thing about him is he's someone who had a reputation in Source apparently as what they call in Australia a caker, which is a choker. A guy who does really well in group stages, doesn't do that well in the final and the playoffs. Does really well online, doesn't do that well at the big line in the big moment. In this team, he's starting to get over that, it feels like. He's starting to become more of a legit player. He's someone where he's mainly playing an entry or a second entry role in the lineup that had Havoc. And he seems, in terms of his style of play, to be very peak heavy. He loves to take duels. He loves to take aim matchups and just, it's going to be a shootout. Whoever hits the headshot, whoever gets the kill is going to win that battle. He's not going to pull back. He's not going to use position. He's not going to use his teammates. He's going to go in. He's going to try and take these duels. He's going to try and open the site up. JKS, a bit more lurky in terms of style of play, but more in the middle of the pack, really. Now, the third best player in the team, but here's the problem, is Yam. Now, the problem is Yam joined in April of this year, and he's already had a bunch of games that were quite bad with this team. Now, up until the RGN tournament, his consistency in number of big games was terrible. This is a guy who was really struggling, but he started to improve a little bit beyond that. He started to get his legs under him. Now, admittedly, against TSM, IEM, on Dust 2, he had a 2-kill game, which is very bad. Now, the problem here is, in Renegades only, he's been a very average player. In fact, he's even had some poor games. He's just been average. And so the difference between JKS and Azza up here is the stars, and Yam, there's a big difference between the two there. He's closer to the bottom two of Sponge and Havoc, whereas in an ideal world, he should be one of the big fraggers. He should be someone who should be up there with JKS and Azza, and this should be the attack core, putting up the numbers, doing the damage to the enemy, and the other two should have been the supportive players. And this should have been where the fragging came from for the Renegades team. But that's a problem. Yam is one of the big issues in the team when they had Havoc in the lineup. Because from everything I talked to other players about, and then watching his game, if what they say is true, they say on LAN he was one of the best Australian players before he joined Vox. He was the player where in immunity he was wrecking. He was really strong. He was a really strong AWPer. He was doing great work on LAN. So if that's true, then he has essentially, as far as we can tell, been ruined by Renegades. They took a strong AWPer, a LAN star, and then they made him just another player in the lineup. They put him down so that he's having to give up the AWP sometimes to Havoc. Havoc's AWPing half the time. Havoc's used to playing a carry type role from his own past, even though he can't play that anymore. And as a result, the whole game's on JKS and Azza's shoulders in terms of fragging. And Yam is down there with Sponge and Havoc, struggling, flailing around, not being able to get it going with the AWP, and never having many good AWP games, actually. Whereas he should have been, at worst, a third star / hybrid star supportive type player, and a sniper all the time. In fact, when I watch him play, and especially now that we've got to see him with the benefit online of when Ostillo's come in the lineup, and now Yam is getting the AWP, the game should have been built around this guy's AWPing. Because Azza's going to take his entries anyway, he's doing that. JKS is going to play more middle roundish, to take some clutch rounds, take some big frags. He's going to put up the numbers. Now you need Yam on the T side to work the game around him, so he's getting the comfortable spots. Then on CT side, he's being put too much in that static spot. That style where you just hold this one angle, and that's if you play it, and if they overrun you, they overrun you. He should be being moved around the map more, so he can take this spot here, I'm comfortable, I'm ready to take a pick here, the next round I go over here. They should have been using him more in this sense. He's the obvious person who was missing out in terms of has more potential and wasn't being used for it in that team. Then we come to the last two, the most old school members, Havoc and Sponge. Now, Havoc is the player where, if you ask, when was this guy good? You'll only hear about him being good in old games. In CSGO, I thought he was really bad from what I saw. I saw many bad games. I mean, this is a guy who had 11 LAN maps with this lineup where he had single-digit frags. Really, really bad. His best games with this lineup were when it essentially didn't matter, were when it was against bad opponents. I mean, he had a good game against the old Luminosity lineup before they got the really skilled lineup at RGN. That's about it. At Gamescom, he was minus 50 differential for the tournament, despite the fact, remember, 3 of the games they played at the tournament were against SK, and he ended up minus 50. He tries to AWP, but in doing so takes it away from Yam, maybe takes some comfort away from Yang. So to me, he 100% had to go. He could not stay in this lineup. Maybe he can go to a different team and take a different role, not least because he wasn't playing a supportive enough role in this team to even justify him doing that and help facilitate people like Yam and Azza being better. So as a result, he's taking up resources, and he was a pretty bad player. So he 100% had to go. There was no question of that. Then Sponge. Now, he's the in-game leader. The problem is, he's a guy himself who's struggled. I mean, against Team Liquid at DreamHack Stockholm, he had a 2-map affair where he got 12 frags over 2 maps. That's unacceptable. This guy had 12 single-digit maps in terms of frags with this lineup. He wasn't much of a fragger in the early team up until Gamescom. Admittedly, since then, September, November type period, his fragging did go up, and he actually at time was top fragging, but I feel like that was detrimental to the team, because he was supposed to be the S-Scare style player who doesn't get the frags, but he's going to mastermind the T side, and that's what's going to win you the games and put other people in position to succeed. Feels to me like once the team went to shit, and he was already in a bad position, he just put himself into more of a lurking happy star role, tried to rack up frags, was doing so, but the team's losing the game. Because think about this, when they were at their best, Gfinity, they played with this loose, fast, hard-hitting style where they just hit you. They see an opening, they pounce on it, they bully in there. Azza, JKS, go in there, start making frags, don't leave the other team a lot of time to make decisions, and they try and get those T-side rounds, and that's what's going to win them the game. Instead, as the year went on and they had their issues, they started trying to be like an anti-strat team, play a very tactical style, play slow, play... When they're playing on some of these maps, train, cobble, they're trying to play very tactically, and it's not working. They don't have the fragging to make it work, and more importantly, their support players are playing terribly overall. He's a guy where I look at the structure of that team with Havoc, and it makes no sense to me, because the way they've got the players set up means that they're going to be left in a lot of scenarios where you have a Sponge and Havoc 2vx situation, and they're the worst players, and they're not going to win the clutch round situations. Instead, you want to live in a world where you have someone like if Azza goes in for the entries, he hasn't got Havoc coming after him. If JKS is coming in, he's coming in to win the 1v2, the 1v3. That's where you've got a chance there. He's the guy who puts up kills. You don't want Sponge and Havoc being the guys left with all these decisive clutch round situations, because then you're not going to win many, are you? What's worse for Renegades, after we looked at the maps, the bans, the players, here's one of the most criminal things I found when I investigated them. Because I went and I asked people in the Australian scene, and I asked former players, and I asked people around the scene who watched a lot of the games. And I was shocked to find this fact out. Are you ready? Remember all the things they said about the NA excuses of not having salary and we're not full-time and we don't live in America? So when they were in Australia, which by the way was for the majority of the year, they only moved to America not that long ago, like a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. Otherwise, they were just boot camping occasionally in America. They were still in Australia overall. So while they were in Australia for all of 2015, you'd think the one thing you could be certain of, right, is they were practicing immunity. They were practicing Chiefs, the second and third best teams in Australia, right? You'd think that, right? No, you'd be wrong. They barely played any scrims against these teams. Chiefs told me they didn't practice with them. Immunity told me they played something like 3 scrims with them all year long. And these are the second and third best teams with the next best players and the next best teams in terms of performances. And Immunity have international experience. They're not playing these teams. Instead, they're playing teams like SYF, who were like the 6th best Australian team. They were playing Division 2 teams in Australia. Australian Division 2 teams. They were skipping out on online tournaments in Australia because they don't want to play these teams. And you know the reason why they don't want to play these teams? Well, I tried to reach out to Renegades, ask them for comment. They didn't want to make any comment on it. Fair enough. So I have to speculate. I would speculate that the reason they didn't want to play Immunity is they actually thought, oh, well, if we play Immunity will get a bit better. Maybe they'll be able to beat us out in qualifiers and stuff, and they'll gain a little bit of edge off us, but we won't get anything off them. So a very selfish mentality, keeping the Australian scene down, basically, to try and keep themselves, who have most of the best players, the top dogs, keep those guys down, but in doing so, not getting good practice at home. What's funny is, in Australia, they've essentially got the same exact problem NA had before all the salary injections, where they used to have the 2 good teams who didn't play each other, or if they played each other, fucked around and just tried to fuck with each other and trash talk, and as a result, never got good practice, then had good practice at boot camp. So we're like, if we had this practice all the time, we'd be super sick. Then got that good practice and now still aren't super sick. So the Australian teams themselves are limiting themselves in this particular way. Especially, here's the key thing. I can understand for Immunity if they hadn't wanted to, but it seems like they did want it. Or Chiefs. Those teams that don't have the full salary, don't have all the resources. Renegades were not practicing those teams while they were getting paid full-time salaries, while they were going to all the international events, while they were having boot camps. So what the fuck were they doing in Australia? Dicking around with Division 2 teams, playing the 6th best team. And this is who you're practicing your T-halves against, and then you're wondering why you're getting like 2 rounds on T-side and getting ultra fucking bodied every LAN by international teams. This is unacceptable, guys. Now, I've got to say, I've got to give a bit of shit to the org as well of Renegades. Not just the players who obviously fucked up certain guys' styles like Yam and didn't use the support players in the right way. But I've got to give a bit of shit to the org because the org just sat around and let this happen. They refused to cut everyone. They gave them a breaking in period that lasted way too long. The breaking in period should be a month or 2. If in terms of events, it should be like 2 or 3 LANs. After that, you have a sense of where the teams are. And if you go look where they were after 2 or 3 LANs, you can see where they were in Renegades. And that's where they stayed, essentially. And only got worse, if anything. Now, the team signed on the 19th of June, around 7 months ago now. Now, improvements don't take that long to manifest. And like I say, if anything, they got worse, both relative to their peers, the teams around their level, and previous performances they had, those upset wins, those good performances on certain maps. Since Gamescom, which was in early August, they've won 2 maps of decent European teams. Those are Titan at the major, ESL 1 Cologne, the team that had shocks in it after the French Shuffle, and Virtus Pro. Those are the only 2 decent European teams they've won a map of since August. They've won 6 maps off good NA teams, and they won 2 maps off the old Luminosity. So 10 total maps since Gamescom versus notable teams, spread over 6 LANs, because obviously IAM Taipei had no one good, so I won't count that LAN. But 6 LANs, and you've only won 10 maps versus good teams. Now, here's the key thing to understand for the org here. They've been very naive about how they've dealt with CSGO, because part of the reason why they didn't want to do this is because they wanted to give the team time to move to America and settle down and really adapt. They can't be given to people 7 months before the fucking clock starts. Most great lineups, the lifespan of one is less than a year. And those, the ones that have more than a year, tend to be not only winning sides, but some of the greatest teams of all time. NIP, Virtus Pro. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. Even the guys from Fnatic only had something like a year and a half with the best team of all time. Envious have had 2 fantastic teams. Theirs have lasted less than a year each. Astralis guys picked up a guy. They haven't even got to a year yet for that lineup. Oh, they might have just got to it now, actually. So, you look at this lineup, and by the way, even they considered a roster move for Zipnix. You look at the rest of the scene since Renegades made this lineup, signed this team rather, not made the lineup because they made the lineup with Vox Seminar. Since Renegades signed this lineup in June 19th, 2015, Envious changed lineup, won 4 events into the major. Fnatic changed lineup, won 5 events. NIP changed lineup. Luminosity changed lineup. Had 2 second places, a top 4. The only top teams who didn't change lineup is Na'Vi, who were fantastic and actually changed the in-game coach. That's one thing they did. They had TSM, who, like I said, thought about a lineup change, but have had a million top 4s very consistent. And Virtus Pro, who we know are famously amazing with that lineup and continually come back to win events every 4 to 5 months at least. So they have exceptions as to why they didn't change lineups. Everyone else in the scene changed lineups. Mouse Spots, everyone, Cloud9, Team Liquid, Luminosity, everyone around their level who are their peer group, Titan, Dignitas, every team, G2. Time has been and gone to get any good players. That's part of the reason why they can't change lineup. They had to go to Ostillo. One of the things that tilts me about this particular team is one of the reasons I recommended them to the Renegades org and why I thought it was great to buy them is because I thought, you know what, right now they're okay. Maybe there's potential for them to do more. Turned out that wasn't the case. But I said, you know what, the great thing about them is they speak English. Therefore, you can pick any English-speaking player. You can pick foreign players. You can pick players from America, pick players from Canada. You've got a massive player base to replace people with. So once you figure out what the problems are, Yam, Havoc, whatever it might be. In this case, obviously, Yam is going to get a chance while he's got his still on the team. Whatever the problems in the lineup are, we can go and get these players. What did they do? By sitting for 7 months and not making a roster move at that point in time until they got Ostillo now, they let all the NA players that were available get signed up. They let all the notable European free agents, Nico, Pimp, Alu, all these guys get signed up by different people. The time has now been and gone to sign good players from there. I mean, a player like Nico would be significantly better than anyone in this team. And there was time when he was available when they could have gotten him. To me, the Australian and New Zealand players are a waste of time. I'm just going to say that outright. Like, yeah, maybe some of them could fit this team better and the team could be better. But best case scenario, maybe they could be a bottom top 10 team if they had the right mix of Australian and New Zealand players. I don't see them getting players from that region and becoming a team that has any chance at being a top 5 team in the world. I think they have any chance whatsoever. So I think you've got to go for broken. You've got to try and be the best. And you've got to get the right NA players in. You've got to transition the team and become a half NA team, half Australian team. Then, if you have the right lineup, maybe now you can be like the 6th best team in the world, 7th best team in the world. Maybe it's possible at that point in time. It's also the fact that, like I say, since they didn't get the team to NA, since 9 weeks ago or something, before that they were just boot camping in NA. So the whole clock had never even started for the org. That's unacceptable to me. You can't be waiting this long. I also feel like part of the reason the org didn't make the moves is because they made the classic mistake in business of becoming friends with the players. And so not only would the players make excuses to them, well, yeah, we haven't actually been in NA for long enough. Now we want to give this team a little bit of time to bed in. But they themselves start believing that shit and buying into it as well. Like, oh, got to give them time, let them get accustomed to NA. These excuses are bullshit. They don't work. Now, bringing in Ostillo, first of all, removing Havoc, absolutely the right move. Bringing in Ostillo, I'm not as sure about. I think it's a good move. He was a good player, I thought, on Immunity, but it's not going to fix all their problems. Now, he was an entry guy for Immunity, so it's going to help, because now if you put Ostillo with Azza, you've got a good entry unit there. That's pretty solid. Now you've got a decent chance to get your T-sides going. And on CT side, he could hold sites by himself. Whereas Havoc had a bunch of problems on CT side, especially because he kept trying to AWP. Now here's one of the problems, as an org, I would tell them to watch out for. Since you're refusing to get NA players, and since you're sitting around thinking, well, we need players from Australia and New Zealand, here's the thing. Right now it's okay, because you've got the team to NA, you paid them all good salaries, but let's say in a year from now, all these other NA teams, they're waiting for players to be available. Let's say JKS's contract becomes available. If I was an NA team, JKS speaks English. He understands American culture to a degree. He lives in America at this point in time. If I'm other teams, I'd be considering getting JKS. If I'm a Cloud9, if I'm a TSM, an NRG, a CLG, I'd be looking at JKS and one day saying, well, if you're not going to take players from NA into your team, hey, he can go the other way. He can come over to an NA team. I think that's a real possibility. So you can see, I hope this whole video has been a reality check for Renegades, because essentially they were a below average, subpar team on almost every level. Personnel-wise, how they use the personnel, map strength, overall map pool of what they can even play, what they have banned against them, how predictable they are, how predictable their bans are. This was a team that was gradually breaking down and getting worse in almost every area, and as a result, deservedly so, got bodied loads of times, and even their wins weren't that impressive beyond the first LAN, that Gfinity Spring Masters 2, where they had the upset potential and they had that new lineup. Besides that, Not really that impressed with Renegades. And let's see going forwards. It does seem like Yam might have been fixed a little bit by Ostillo going in. Now he's the sole opener. Now he's not having to play those aspects anymore. Now they've got a decent entry force, so it's not just going to be the worst players left over. Now maybe they can be a bit better. But I still see a lot of work for this team in every regard to be close to a top 10 team in the world.